Okay, here we go. Stand by. 3, 2, 1.
The thinking atheist. It's not a person. It's a symbol. An idea.
The population of atheists in this country is going through the roof.
Rejecting faith. Pursuing knowledge. Challenging the sacred.
If I tell the truth, it's because I tell the truth. Not because I put my hand on a book and made a wish.
And working together for a more rational world.
Take the risk of thinking for yourself. Much more happiness, truth, beauty, and wisdom will come to you that way.
Assume nothing. Question everything. And start thinking. This is the Thinking Atheist Podcast, hosted by Seth Andrews.
Today's broadcast is a conversation with ex-Muslim activist Zara Kay. The conversation originated via a Skype video discussion. There is a video link in the description box. We had a not great connection. Beyond that, though, I'm really glad to have her as part of the show. I think she's doing some important work out there. This week's podcast is my conversation with Zara Kay. Enjoy. Zara Kay is someone who's been a vocal critic of Islam and has taken a lot of criticism for being such. And so I wanted to talk to her. I actually wasn't familiar with your work, Zara, until I had seen you on screen when they Skyped you in at the Faithless Forum event in Dallas, Texas. And so it's an honor to be able to speak to you personally after all this time. Thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me.
Tell me about your story in a nutshell. Ex-Muslim, right?
Yeah. Ex-Muslim, Tanzanian born, Australian now, lived in Australia, and I've recently relocated to London temporarily.
So tell me about your extrication from Islam. How did this happen in a nutshell?
Yeah, so very, very recently, actually, just a couple of years is when I started reading. I heard podcasts by Sam Harris, and Ayan was on it, and then Sarah Haider was on it, and then I read the book Atheist Muslim by Ali Rizvi, and I was like, whatever they're saying, this is my story, this is my mind. I've just not been able to say it, or I didn't even know people like these exist. It was just so I had stopped praying when I was 14, and I left Tanzania when I was 16. So it's pretty much on my own. Settling in a different country, meeting different people, and something just didn't feel right. Like, for the first time, I saw a woman who called herself a Muslim, and she wasn't wearing a headscarf. And I was 16, and that was my first time. I started wearing a hijab when I was about 8 years old. And, this was my first time being exposed to the world outside my bubble. And that journey led on to me more, reading more, and understanding more of the religion. And before I knew it, I stopped believing, and it was easier because I think I'd been an atheist since I was 14, but never confronted it, or could never tell anyone that I didn't believe in God and I didn't believe in prayers.
So I'm watching, Yasmin Mohammed and others who are on Twitter, and we're talking about this embracing by some progressives of the veil, of the covering, of the hijab. And we are saying, and I join the chorus, that let's not celebrate this tool of oppression, of dehumanization. And what was weird is whenever I said what I thought was a relatively innocuous thing, and Yasmin and others had the same response on their feeds, people lost their minds and said, how dare you tell a woman what to wear, which is not remotely what I am saying.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, hijab by definition is men telling women what to wear. It is, if you look at the reasons for why women are wearing hijab, they don't wear it in front of their brothers or their dad. It's always in front of a relative or even a person they can marry, right? So that's the covering, and that's all about the modesty culture that relies heavily on the woman. And a lot of people have just been really scared to tap into it. They're not going to wear it themselves. The Western feminists, they won't wear it themselves. But they're still to I would say protect or to defend women wearing it. But the problem does not rise for women who choose to wear it. I don't think it's a choice, but that's a different topic. But the problem is not for the women in the West who can wear it and can remove it. The problem is about talking for those who don't have that choice. From a very young age, you were told to wear it, that a good Muslim woman is one that wears a hijab, that you will go to hell if you don't wear a hijab, that you'll be tied from a pole, with your hair strands that you show to men if you don't wear a hijab. And also the social ostracism. I took off my hijab. My friends were like, why are you taking your naked? And that was my dad as well, who wasn't happy with me taking off my hijab. And a lot of my friends stopped being my friends. They had nasty comments about me, saying that I moved to the West and I became like the West because I don't wear a hijab. And they still think it's a choice, but all it's done is it's a coercion. And the negligence of Western feminism is basically around, the fact that they don't know what the tool represents. They don't know the historical context of it. They don't know how it came into play. And that men don't have the same restrictions as women do. So it's really surprising to me that people who have no idea what the hijab is about are there to defend it because it's a woman's choice to wear it. Would you say the same about the Nazi swastika symbol? Like, would it be the same thing about anything that's representing something that is oppressive, misogynistic? And there's always this double standards because the left don't want to be Islamophobic if they start criticizing it, which puts us in a really sad position when we're fighting for activists that are basically in jail right now because they want freedom.
There's a little bit of a spotty connection. Thanks for your patience, everybody. She's Skyping in from the UK, but I think it's fine for our purposes here. So, but if you hear a glitch here and there, just hang on just a second, and the feed will catch up. You said the word Islamophobia. I just recently criticized, and I love American Atheist, and I'm in a small way a part of what they are about, and I promote them and I attend their conferences and have spoken at some. But I took issue with a sharing of an article recently in regard to Islamophobia. And honestly, I just think it's a bullshit term. I mean, I think there is anti-Muslim bigotry, but that's not the same as Islamophobia. I don't know. I'll let you take the ball and run with it. Islamophobia, what do you think?
Oh, absolutely. I think the term needs to be scrapped. It just prevents any dialogue from ever happening. It's just a defense shield for people in the religion of Islam or even others who are like, don't talk about Islam. We don't want to hear it. No other religion has that phobia attached to it. So why does one have more priority or should be shielded from criticism, from legit criticism that affects all of us? Ex-Muslims, people outside religion, people living in the West, people living in the East as well. And that word is just used as a defense. It just defends you from the reality of things. Where people are criticized, the left shuts it down by saying it's Islamophobic, and you're aiding to Muslim bigotry. And criticism of an ideology, every bad idea needs to be called out. We're not solving problems if we don't talk about it. If we shut speech, we're not actually solving the problem. We're just enabling it. And I feel like that term has been misused so many times, and I have been called Islamophobic and as a woman talking about Islam, even while I was a Muslim. And, before I even left, I was just, smeared with like Islamophobic attempts because I opposed the killing of homosexual people in Sharia law or just shunning them away. And I was called Islamophobic. And I'm like, what does that term even mean? I have legit criticism of the religion, of the ideology, and we're using that term to shut people down. We're not engaging in any conversation at this point.
Is this a propaganda success? I mean, Islamists like to call critics of their religion Islamophobic as a way to scream, you're a bigot, and this is supposed to be a conversation stopper. But this is taught in many fundamentalist Islamic cultures, right? It's good to call your critics Islamophobic because so often they're so terrified of being labeled bigots that they'll shut up and run the other direction, right?
And that is exactly why we need to talk more about it. And that is exactly why, despite being shut down, we need to talk about it. And you're right, it is like a propaganda success that, like, you know, people just start labeling people who speak against it so they can, you know, they can hide behind it. What I find really amusing is a criticism of the ideology is taken as a personal offense to people believing in it. And it has nothing to do with those people. It's a criticism of a genuine ideology. If you had been in that situation where people are like, oh, we're going to kill you for being born the way you are, or even of a particular color, you know, that is a bad idea, and we need to criticize it no matter where it comes from. And I think the most terrorizing fact for me was, like you mentioned, the criticism that I get online. It's come from the left, it's come from the right, it's come from the Muslim, and it's come from the right. So I feel like ex-Muslims have, you know, any platform that we get, we're just criticized on all ends. And a lot of people have just made, you know, they've also tried taking advantage of ex-Muslims to feed in their anti-Muslim bigotry. And that puts us in a difficult position because often we have to think about what we, like, you know, yes, we have to think about what we said, but we have to, like, start making sure that that doesn't affect our families, because, you know, our families as we know it, a lot of us have been ostracized. I have a good relationship with my family. We're still working on it. But a lot of ex-Muslims have just been shut away from their family. So when they give out a criticism, they've been shut down and their families have been under attack, or they'll argument around, like, oh, would you say the same thing to your family? And I'm like, yeah, I would. My criticism of the religion is not affected at all by my personal relationships. I don't like their ideologies, and that's not going to stop.
Let's talk about the day you took off your hijab, and you can share as much or as little as you want. But I was reading your story, or part of your story, and what I had read was that when you took off the veil, took off the covering, and liberated yourself, shortly afterwards you were in some way abused. Can you speak to that?
Yeah. So taking the hijab off took me years to come to that conclusion. Like I said, the first time I ever saw it was when I was 16, when you could be a Muslim woman because, well, you're born with that. And you could still not wear a hijab, and that's okay. Like, you know, people had done it. So I loosened it up over time. I used to go for dance classes, and I wore a hijab while doing salsa, and it just felt wrong. So in the class, I would take it off, finish salsa, come out, wear it again. And then there were times when I'd go on a holiday and my friends weren't there, or there were people who wouldn't judge me for not wearing it, and I would slowly take it off. But the moment that I actually took it off, I moved to Australia, so people didn't know me then. They didn't know the Zara who used to wear a headscarf. So, you know, it was a new life, and that was a little easier. But I got criticism from my family as well. I was told I had no self-respect and that I was equivalent to a naked woman. And that was exactly the ideology that I was trying to fight. That, you know, people not covering their headscarf does not make them naked. And we say hijab is a choice, but you're not even giving me that choice, because the alternative is abuse, ostracism, and, you know, the idea that you're going to hell. For the longest time, even after I took it off, I could never wear short sleeves. It was always long sleeves. I was very uncomfortable. I wasn't taught to love my body because it was always meant to be covered. You're not meant to show anyone. You're not meant to go outside, even in tight clothes. And even when I traveled to the Middle East, so my family was very religious and would go for a pilgrimage in the Middle East, in Iraq, Iran, Syria, I had to cover up and wear layers of different types of hijab because they wear it differently there. And it just felt so odd because it wasn't who I was. It wasn't what I wanted to do. And when I started wearing it at age 8, I was so excited that I wanted to wear it and be a good Muslim woman. But then going, like, you know, at the age of 12, I was thinking about removing it, and I told my mom, and my mom was like, Dad has never allow it. Get married, you can ask your husband. And to me, that was just like I was a property of a man. I'm either my father's daughter or I'm my husband's wife. Like, when do I get to live my life? When does Zara do Zara? When do I get my independence? So when I received and came with a lot of criticism, even until now, despite me not being a Muslim, I've been called a whore. I think almost every single day I've just stopped looking at my YouTube comments. Showing my hair is equivalent to me being a whore or a prostitute. When you're only focused on respecting women who cover up, you tend to create an army of men and women who don't respect those who don't cover up, who will subconsciously just objectify women who don't wear it, who will then have the opportunity to harass women that don't wear it. Like, we're always treated as objects.
So you mentioned Western feminism. I mean, or do you feel like Western feminists, I don't want to blanket everybody, so let's say some progressives and Western feminists have failed the women oppressed by these regimes because they are, maybe their focus is in the wrong direction? I mean, I think you and I are both proponents of feminism, egalitarianism, equality between the sexes, right? So you can frame that however you want. But can you speak to Western feminism and what it gets right and what it may have missed the mark on?
So I used to call myself a feminist up until last year, because I realized that feminism has been holding women to different standards. It's in general, regardless of like in the Muslim world, it's replacing male chauvinism with women, like female chauvinism. And like, that's not what we want. We want equality instead of like hatred for the other gender. So I stopped calling myself a feminist, but it even made my point stronger when I realized that a lot of Western feminists are sharing or just not letting other people talk about the issues faced in their countries because it's a cultural thing. They should do what's right for their culture. So we've held women to different standards, and that's not feminism. How can you ever say that, oh, Saudi women, at least learned how to now, after 9 years when other women have already started driving. Or, Iranian women, well, hijab is part of their culture and it's a country law, so they should be wearing it. And when we travel to Iran, we will wear it too because we need to respect it without even knowing what the hijab is like, or what the hijab is meant for, or even understand historical context. And also, like, ignoring the fact that there's so many women in jail right now who have been trying to fight it, or have just removed the hijab and have been fined, have been gone to jail, or sometimes in a lot of places like Pakistan, they're like maybe taking a selfie, and nobody fights for this women's rights. And when we do, we're shut down by Western feminists saying it's their choice. It's not. It's really not. It's wearing a hijab is like making peace to your abuser. You've been abused for a long time. You've been told you need to wear it, and you start playing mental gymnastics, and you start appropriating it in every other context, like the New Zealand Prime Minister who wore a hijab, completely ignored that there are Muslims who don't wear hijab, that there have been Muslims who've been in jail who don't want to wear hijab. People started appropriating it. The Westerners started appropriating it in New Zealand, and that was honest. That was a win. That was them saying, hey, look, the whole of New Zealand is now wearing hijab, so that's totally right. And I know how narratives can be shifted to suit people's agenda. And a lot of times the Western feminists have just ignored all of that. They have just ignored that, there are women, in the West who have been raised to different standards than every other girl in the West because of the so-called culture that we don't want to offend. But that's not fair on those girls. That's not fair on the other women who want that chance out and haven't got it, and nobody's fighting for their rights. And these are all women that can't talk. And part of the reason why I opened Faithless Hijabi, so that's the nonprofit I run now, is to have people's voices be amplified without creating severe damage to them personally. Because, as we know it, anybody who comes out public as an ex-Muslim or wants to remove the hijab, we're criticized. I've had people gone like, my Facebook, why are you showing your skin or your neck if you don't want to sleep with me? I mean, that's the idea that they actually have and they genuinely believe in. And then we still have the Western feminists who are silent about all of this.
We've got a little bit of some lag and some glitching on the Skype connection, so I want to make sure I get the organization that you mentioned. Was it the organization that you founded? What was it called? Yeah,
it's called Faithless Hijabi.
Faithless Hijabi. Make sure and send me a link to that. I'm going to put it in the description box. Looks like I've got an international call, 44 on the switchboard. Hi, you're on the Thinking Atheist podcast. Who's this?
It's Rosemary again.
Hi, Rosemary. Do you have a question or comment for Zara Kay?
I've got a comment. I used to work with Muslim boys, men, and they were young lads, and they were just so disrespectful to everyone, to women. They went out drinking. They slept with girls. They did everything that was wrong. That says in the Quran, and yet I know their sisters were at home sort of being the good Muslim girl. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, that is exactly what I've been trying to counter, the modesty and the honor culture that is dependent on the women. Men have different standards. They don't have to go through hymen checks like women sometimes have to go through. Even in the West, we haven't made it illegal, that we're holding women to another level itself, that everything is dependent on the women. But then when it comes to the men, even men themselves, they'll go out partying, they'll have sex, and they'll still call themselves Muslims. And then when it comes to marrying a woman, they're like, oh, I want a virgin, never had alcohol, who's never spoken to boys, who's never kissed anyone. And it's the hypocrisy has been enabled by fathers and mothers as well. You've been raised to go like, oh, well, when you start giving kids different curfews or different standards, and you're like, oh, but he's a boy and he can do what he wants. And I haven't been told it, but I've been around women who've technically, the brothers are playing outside and she wasn't allowed to play. And, the brothers went to school and universities, and a lot of my friends, women, were not allowed to go overseas at all, or even sleepovers, or go out with friends. And it's such sad situation that there's so many women that still go through this in the West, regardless of being like second generation immigrants. And we've segregated the Western values, which are progressive values, to there is no values, because those are a representation of the 6th and the 7th century. And a lot of times we haven't grown from it. Like, we refuse to grow from it because, it was right at that time and we need to continue doing it.
Sounds like a fundamentalist was honking you the horn, trying to drown you out, Zara. So we will not be silent, damn it. Hey, Rosemary, where were you when you witnessed this sort of hypocritical behavior?
I used to work at Land Rover down in Birmingham.
I'm not talking about the organization, like the company. I'm talking about the geographic region where you were. I'm not trying to call out a business. Say it again.
It was Birmingham, and I used to work like night shift, and the young lads were just really pissing me off because they're saying all these sort of anti-women, anti-Christian. I mean, one of them he used to really annoy me because he used to say, "Oh, Jesus," but the minute you went, "Oh, Allah," as in an insult, he sort of like look at you and sort of say, "Oh, don't be Islamophobic." And I'm like, well, you just actually cursed, my what I used to be, and he got really sort of like over sort of sensitive about it, and yet he's going out, taking drugs, sleeping with girls. It was just like, a proper Muslim, you're a hypocrite.
No, definitely. I think it's a problem. It has a lot to do with how we've indoctrinated people with religion, and specifically with Islam, where you've been taught to love the Prophet and God from birth, no questions asked. And, when you grow up to that stage, that's why I said that any criticism of it is taken as a personal offense. And that is ridiculous because we should be able to talk about it. Jesus, there's blaspheming in Christianity, which has less of a repercussion as compared to Islam. And why are there double standards? Why are people still being oblivious to the fact that those double standards exist? And then an extreme view of the Quran exists. And if we don't talk about it and counter it, how do you expect things to change?
Rosemary, thanks so much for the call. You're greatly appreciated.
Okay. Oh, when are you gaming next?
When am I gaming next?
Yeah.
Probably sooner than I should because I have a lot to do. But look for me tomorrow. We'll try it tomorrow. Seth Andrews Gaming
All right,
Badly.
then.
Thanks, Rosemary.
Thanks.
What do you play?
Well, I don't play well, but I started to play games just to try to distract myself from the inbox. My wife says that everybody should have some kind of distraction. She calls it bubble gum for the brain. And so whether it's, this or that, or a sporting event or music or whatever.
Yeah, that's always it.
And so I started streaming online knowing that I was just horrible. And people seem to like to watch me game horribly. It's bizarre. So I started a page.
That sounds like really cool people if they want to
All right,
fail at games.
Back to the topic at hand.
Sorry,
so, Zara Kay, I'm watching these videos more and more in these Middle Eastern countries where the women are taken off the veil and they are just being defiant. And the more they're shouted down by, I don't know, the pious, the people who are right there saying, you're disgraceful. And they're like, screw you. There's a rising tide in some of these places. And some of these women are paying a pretty significant price. You've been following some of this, and what are your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to be fair, the Exmuslim movement has been going on for almost a decade, but in the last 2 years, it has just been rising, more people coming out despite the repercussions. Ayaan Hirsi came out ages ago, and now she needs a bodyguard. But, well, I'm not at that stage yet, but it's definitely made it easier for myself. The more you try to silence people, the more there is a resistance to it, the more there are people who are actually coming out, and there are more people fighting against it, because how many voices are they going to shut down? I was recently asked, why do I do what I do despite the vile adversities? And my response was, had I not done it, there wouldn't be so many other girls reached out in appreciation, because they can't talk. They still live with their families. And to me, my work and other activists' works is so worth it. It's so worth it because we're trying to create a revolution from the inside. Despite living outside in the West, the way we can counter these narratives are by empowering women. Just like Rosemary mentioned, there was this double standards, and the best thing we can do, and the downfall of these extreme ideas that are harmful, will be by empowering the most subjugated, the most subjugated race, gender in the system, and this will be the women. Women speak out more. Women stop being subjugated. Women stop taking in what has been set for them by their parents, by their husbands, even by their sons in Saudi. Male guardianship, it's still dependent, you can still have your son as your male guardian, which is moralizing for women, especially moms and older women. They're like, oh, I have to wait for my son to go out. But yeah, more and more every day, I have seen myself get, in the past 2 weeks, I've had 12 people come out to me, mostly women. I've had so many Muslim girls who've come to me and I'm sure I lost my, but I have to take off my hijab. And how do I do this? How do I have that conversation with my family? We don't have this one-on-one guides. So the easiest way is for me to make videos, but also talk to them and understand their situation and their family dynamics, to be able to have the conversation to help build up, one, the confidence and the courage to voice their opinion, and also making sure that they're safe, because there are genuinely families out there who hate their daughters for dissent.
Can we talk about your safety? You've gotten death threats, right?
I wake up to a threat, rape, death threats, got 2 terrorist attacks. I was on a plane and someone's like, I hope your plane gets hijacked. And, Twitter suspended that account immediately. But just a few days ago, somebody jokingly said, I was just telling my friends that I would bomb your neighborhood. I took a screenshot, and that was on Facebook, and Facebook,
I'm sorry, you cut out.
And I'm like, really?
Sorry. I lost you. Facebook did or did not do what?
No, they didn't do anything. It was basically, the text said that I will bomb your neighborhood. And I was like, that doesn't fear me because you don't know where I live. But you can say that, and Facebook hasn't banned you. Can you imagine what the reaction would be if it was reversed? If I said the same thing? I mean, I would have people down my throats. But there's a certain level of hypocrisy that people have with, I've been told, I asked for it, that I've been asking for the death threats, that I've been asking for the rape threats, that it is my fault for criticizing an ideology, and I shouldn't expect anything less.
I'm interested too. I was talking about, and this goes well beyond Islam, but any female activist. I've noticed that the threats that you get are often violently sexual. I mean, they're alarming in that way, right? You mentioned it. You don't just get death threats, but it's rape threats. I mean, I'm going to commit sexual violence against you as a way to dominate you. Is this an Islamic is this something that Islam is responsible for in a way? Can you address it for me?
I think there are multiple factors to it. One, not all Muslims have done that, right? Not all Muslims have wanted to do that, but there is an overwhelmingly large amount of hate that I've got that are mostly from Muslims. I've got some Christians, but not as bad. It's always from the Muslim men. It's always been an attack on the way I look. I've been told I'm fat and I should commit suicide, and I've been told, I told you about being called a prostitute and being paid by Jews. A lot of it is sexual because they think that they shut women down when you make them self-conscious about the way they look.
Best Name on Twitter actually had a good point. I think sexual threats exist in every country and culture. And I think, I'm not trying to say that Islam has a monopoly on this, but it does seem in a male-dominated culture where women are considered property and often dehumanized by the veil, we do see a lot of sexually driven threats of violence against them as a form, I think, of domination. You exist to please and serve me seems to be the narrative. So that's kind of where I was going. Do you think that's an accurate way to phrase it, Zara?
Yeah, absolutely. That is a narrative that is quite widely accepted and quite widely even spoken about. Yeah. That, there's always this thing as especially even with polygamy, men are allowed multiple wives, women aren't allowed to. They're properties of men. If a woman disobeys, you can strike her after taking necessary actions. And, just things like and that's even compared to child discipline. You're talking about an adult here. An adult wife is meant to have equal rights as you. We don't have equal rights in religion, especially. We don't have equal rights in Islam, in testimony, in inheritance, wearing the hijab. All of this has degraded women systematically, and that has given men the upper power to then start treating women as less than them.
Our connection remains a little bit of a challenge. Let's press through. Area code 732. You're on the Thinking Atheist podcast. Who's this?
My name is Jesse. So I wanted to ask a question. In a Jewish religious community in New York, where the same sort of threats were made to women, especially any woman who dared to try to get an education. So do you think this is something that just happens in extremely religious places, or is it something that happens in the Abrahamic tradition?
I think it is something that happens in Abrahamic religions are, and I think Seth would agree with me that they're quite similar, but the one that has dominated now, the one that shows dominance now and affecting in this day and age has been Islam on the top. I feel like, the whole narrative that we're being paid by Jews is ridiculous, because I have never received a single threat from Jews, even when I talk about God or Abrahamic religion. I've never received any resilience. I think, while a lot of us have been progressing over time and evolving as human beings, we've had scientific discovery. We've just moved to an era where we're more intelligent human beings as compared to before. However, when you have religion, I feel like it holds you back to the archaic times. It was written because it was in the books, and it kind of pulls you back, and you're like, oh, but the prophet did it then, surely this should exist now. Or things like, slavery is not completely abolished. We've seen this with the example of ISIS and Yazidi women, that they had been taken as slaves. Child marriage is happen. That women have been, women have been treated as second class or even lower citizens as compared to men. So I think the problem might just be man-made religion or religion in general, especially ones that have not progressed or reformed or have received any kind of values, and ones that refuse to have any of those values.
Let's kind of point everybody to your pages, channels, website. How do people locate you, your activism, your work, your resources? Where do they go?
So Zara Kay on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Yes. And I was like, is it on Reddit? And Faithless Hijabi on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Reddit. People have reached us by email as well. It's all out there if you Google it. Hopefully we'll have our website and funding up soon for people to then start supporting us, or even like start chiming in. We want to start providing mental health coaching and guiding other women. But Faithless Hijabi has taken off quite a bit in October for a newly opened organization. We've got at least like over 3,000 followers on Facebook. So it's going pretty well, and there's a demand for it. So that's happening.
Awesome. Well, Zara, I'm glad you busted out. I'm so glad your voice is out there helping to liberate people from religious oppression, cultural oppression, be able to sort of find their own identities and voices out there. What you do matters. And so I'm glad to speak with you despite the challenges we had sort of in the internet connection. I think it was a conversation well worth having. Shoot me those links. I'll put those in the description box so people can just click to find you on Twitter, etc. And all my best in your work and activism. And thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks for having me. It was a lovely chat.
Follow The Thinking Atheist on Facebook and Twitter for a complete archive of podcasts and videos, products like mugs and t-shirts featuring the Thinking Atheist logo, links to atheist pages and resources, and details on upcoming free thought events and conventions. Log on to our website, thethinkingatheist.com.